Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9. I am playing Luke Skywalker in this video, uh, and using the Energy Conversion Lab, so a Command Luke deck. And I am playing against a Vader Vigilance build. Um, so my thinking with Command Luke, this is actually one of my favorite decks. And the way that I like to run Command Luke is that I really like to use resupply in order to try to get Luke out earlier than normal and start creating a lot of value with his attacks, just sort of gain control of the board with sort of a mid-range style there. So that's really what the deck is aiming to do. But this game, I have a little bit of a problem here because I've started out with a hand that didn't have any turn one play, and now I've mulliganed into another hand that doesn't have a unit I can play on the first turn. Now, to be fair, I could play Entrenched on one of my opponent's units on the first turn, but it's very unlikely that I'll want to do that. So this is going to be a difficult start for my build and not what I want to see, and we'll see how I end up adapting to that as this game goes on. So Luke and Vader are the heroes from the two-player starter and from the demo decks that we saw at Gen Con and Essen. I personally think they're both quite good. Luke is maybe my favorite hero in the game right now, and the Vader is a more aggressive leader that also it's interesting though because he himself doesn't deploy as a leader as a unit until later in the game, whereas his the cards that he's running are often pretty strong in terms of early aggression. So my opponent plays a Death Star Stormtrooper there, one cost 3/1, and I've just taken the initiative. I don't have a lot to do. I do draw C-3PO here, who's a good card to potentially send in. I also have a copy of Resupply in hand. So Resupply is one of the cards that I most want to see in this build. I really like using that to play Luke earlier, develop my resources faster than my opponent, and just kind of get that ramp benefit. But in this case, I want to play out C-3PO because I feel like it's pretty urgent for me to get rid of this trooper. So I play C-3PO, miss my guess with respect to the cost of the top card, seeing an Agent Callus, and I am going to be able to shield C-3PO this turn using Luke's ability. My opponent, however, plays Vader's lightsaber onto his Stormtrooper. That is a super negative development for me because it gives +3/+1. So now this Stormtrooper is 6/2. First off, that means he's hitting my base much harder. And second off, it means that C-3PO can no longer defeat him with one attack, given that C-3PO only has one power. My opponent then uses Vader's ability to deal 1 damage to my base and knock the shield off of C-3PO. So this is a really unfortunate situation for me. I don't like where I am, and we're going to see what I can do to come back. I would like to be playing that resupply, but I don't feel like I can safely do it. One option would be to entrench C-3PO and then try to take out the Stormtrooper with that. Another option would be to use the Wing Leader instead. So entrenched is probably a little better in that it will leave C-3PO alive, but he could just be pinged off by Vader. The Wing Leader can also be pinged off by Vader, but if my opponent doesn't immediately do it, I'll have a chance to put a shield on the Wing Leader, and given that I'm going first, I can potentially do that. Another option would be to ambush in Kanan and have Kanan kill the trooper. This would cause me to lose Kanan, which I don't really want, but it would mean that I would also get the chance to recover some life, and it would prevent the opponent from making another attack. So we'll see what ends up happening here. I go with the Wing Leader play, buffing up C-3PO to potentially take down the trooper. My opponent immediately hits the base, which I sort of hoped he wouldn't, but that is what he goes for. I'm going to shield my Wing Leader to cover it against Vader's ability. And then I intend to trade my C-3PO for that trooper and get that big source of damage off the field. Might have been better to go for the Kanan play. Hard to say. It would have saved me 6 damage on the base and also gotten me some healing, but it would not allow me to have Kanan on the field. However, I am thinking that might have been a cleaner play. My opponent plays a Death Trooper, so when the Death Trooper's played, it deals 2 damage to an enemy ground unit and 2 damage to a friendly ground unit. The 2 damage on C-3PO doesn't matter that much to me here because I'm planning to trade anyway. And I missed my guess again. I think I guessed 2, ended up seeing a 3. So my opponent has this Death Trooper, is going to use Vader's ability to ping the shield off of my Wing Leader and deal 1 damage to base. I'm going to take the initiative. So overall, overall, I feel like I'm in a kind of dire circumstance just because I've lost so much life on my base already through Vader's pings and the damage from that Stormtrooper. I only have 11 life remaining on the base. My opponent has 30 life remaining, haven't even touched the base, but I'm going to try and start turning things around. Now, interestingly, I actually resourced my copy of Resupply here. And the reason that I did that is I was thinking, what I really want to do is try and get a board set up. So what I need to do this turn is I'm going to ambush in Kanan, have him take out the Death Trooper. So his ability on attack, you may discard 1 card from the defending player's deck for each friendly Spectre unit, only 1 this time. Heal 1 damage from your base for each different aspect among the discarded cards. My opponent discards a card that has 2 aspects. It's a Forced Choke, which is both aggression and villainy. So I then heal 2 from my base, and I'm going to be able to shield Kanan using Luke's ability. So now instead, the life totals are still bad, but I've started doing some repairs to my base. And additionally, I have a strong unit on the board. My opponent plays a Rugged Survivors, 5 cost 3/5 with grit, and you can draw a card on attack, but that ability only functions when you have your leader on the field. I use Luke's ability to shield Kanan, and my opponent takes the initiative. So I'm then going to swing in, do some damage with the wing leader, start getting some damage going, and my hope here is that I'm going to be able to use Kanan with a buff from the wing leader or fleet lieutenant, or maybe the entrenched, to clear out my opponent's rugged survivors and use that to sort of gain control of the board. So we'll see what my opponent has in store for me here. This is also the 6th resource turn, which means Luke may be deploying this turn. Hopefully, will be. Normally, you do want to deploy your leader as soon as possible. There are some situations where you might want to hold it back if the opponent has something especially strong, then we'll just defeat your leader immediately or whatever. But yeah. So my opponent plays another Vader's lightsaber, which is very scary in one sense, but it actually in this situation ends up being favorable for me. So the Rugged Survivor is just 3/5, and yet it gets +3/+1, going up to be a 6/6. But the 4 attack Kanan is now going to attack buffed by a Fleet Lieutenant for +2. That gets him up to 6 attack. He may attack with our unit. If it's a rebel unit, it gets +2/+0 for this attack. So Kanan is now up to 6 attack, which will defeat the Rugged Survivors in 1 hit, even with their lightsaber. It knocks the shield token off of Kanan, and then he mills his top card, which gives me 1 resource. All of a sudden, this board is looking really good for me, and I still get to deploy Luke this turn. So things are looking up this game, though there is the issue of Vader showing up next turn and maybe causing me a bunch of problems. Let's see how this goes. My opponent plays a copy of Takedown to defeat Kanan. So Takedown is a 4-cost event, defeat a unit with 5 or less remaining HP. Now I'm going to send in Luke. Powerful unit, 4/7 on attack. You may give another unit a shield. I'm going to buff Luke with a wing leader, giving him +2 attack, and we're going to go and hit the enemy base here for 6. That also lets me give out a shield. I end up deciding that I'm going to shield my Fleet Lieutenant because if I shielded one of the wing leaders, my opponent could just use whatever removal effect on the unshielded wing leader instead and would still be able to remove one, whereas this is maybe going to constrain the opponent's options more. Not sure if that's correct. I do think shielding a wing leader would be better if my opponent had a TIE Interceptor. The Imperial Interceptor would kill 1 wing leader when deployed, but if I had a shield on there, the other one would be able to clear the Interceptor without itself dying and preventing my opponent from getting a direct 2-for-1. Um, However, this approach is going to reinforce my ground arena a little bit more, which is also maybe the more dangerous side. My opponent plays an ATST, 6 cost 6/7 with Overwhelm. When attacking an enemy unit, deal excess damage to the opponent's base. I am going to get Obi-Wan Kenobi on the field this turn. That's kind of my strategy here. But with 7 resources, I can play Obi-Wan and I can play R2. My thinking is that I want to get Obi-Wan out and put a shield on him. I also want R2 to kind of refine my further draws and get stuff that's going to be relevant for this game. I decided to deploy R2 first. That's also a smaller action, so it just shows less about what my plan is. I see another copy of Takedown. I'm going to leave that on top. That could be a good removal card. for me, just like it was for my opponent taking down Kanan. My opponent pings off one of the wing leaders, also dealing 1 damage to my base. I am going to deploy Obi-Wan at this point, which will mean that Vader is going to be much more constrained in his target selection since Obi-Wan is a Sentinel. Obi-Wan's a 6 cost 4/6 Sentinel, and when he's defeated, you may give 2 experience tokens to another unit you control. And if it's a force unit, draw a card, or another friendly unit, rather, not unit you control. So technically could buff a teammate in team games. Um, my opponent does deploy Vader. I'm going to have Luke swing into the enemy base, inflicting 6 damage. I'm just trying to race at this point. And Luke also gives a shield to Obi-Wan. This means Vader isn't going to be able to kill Obi-Wan in one attack. So Vader is 5/8 and on attack deals 2 damage to a target unit. The thing about that is that if you attack and use your ability on the same target, you can do 7 damage in one attack, which would be enough to defeat the 6 HP Obi-Wan. However, thanks to my shield, the 2 damage from the ability only knocks off the shield. Obi-Wan then does take 5 damage, but is left still alive, still there to intercept another attack. Meantime, I'm going to just throw some hits in on the enemy base. One comes in for the wing leader. My opponent's taking the initiative at this point, and the fleet lieutenant will then also hit the enemy base for another 3 damage, knocking my opponent down to 9 life here. And that does mean that I've gained the life advantage with this turn. And my strategy at this point is that I'm gonna try and press to just close out the game. I'm not that interested in trying to clear out my opponent's units. All I want to do right now is push damage to the base and close things out with the board advantage that I currently have. So my opponent does have the initiative this turn and has a strong initial play using a copy here of maximum firepower. So a friendly Imperial unit deals damage equal to its power to a unit, then another friendly Imperial unit deals damage equal to its power to the same unit. So that means that he hits Luke for 5 from Vader and then 6 from the ATST, defeating Luke from full health to 0. So that does obviously hurt my position. On the other hand, this does mean that his first action didn't kill Obi-Wan, so even though Luke won't get a chance to attack, Obi-Wan will. I attack the enemy base with Obi-Wan, knocking my opponent down to 5 life. And now, I have lethal on board, so I have 6 damage total among these units. And my opponent has to figure out how to stop me. I believe at this point we're going to see, I think it ends up being another maximum firepower played here. In order to pierce the shield on my fleet lieutenant. And yeah, that's right. There we go. A maximum firepower. So the reason this pierces the shield is that the 2 instances of damage from the 2 units are separate. So the first one breaks the shield and the second one defeats the unit. This makes maximum firepower a good card for clearing a shielded unit. And that's also like kind of a little lore, Star Wars lore Easter egg, because maximum firepower was the command that Veers gave to destroy the rebel shield generator on Hoth in Empire Strikes Back. I knock my opponent down to 3 life with the wing leader. My opponent uses the ATST to kill Obi-Wan and deal 5/1 damage to my base. But with Obi-Wan's ability, I get to place 2 experience tokens on a friendly unit, put them on R2. R2 now has 3 attack, which is enough to attack the enemy base and win the game. So despite the very bad start, I am able to come back and get the win here with the command Luke build. And I think this was an interesting game in particular because it kind of highlights how you might need to adapt your plan. I was mentioning earlier how I really want to play resupply, and that's a really core card to this deck and to the strategy that I'm trying to do. But the thing is, in this situation, I felt like I felt like I couldn't afford to play resupply. I needed to go for that Kanan instead. I ended up actually resourcing my resupply, but the Kanan that I played out instead of going for resupply ended up being very useful, allowed me to stabilize the board, and ultimately I got the win. So I think this was an interesting game in that it sort of goes to show sometimes in this game you're going to have to adapt. You might have a tough situation, as I did with the very slow start with no turn 1 play and only a C3PO plus shield on the second turn rather than a unit that's more combat oriented. But I was able to, despite that kind of slow start, I was able to adapt my game plan, end up pivoting away from the ramping into Luke to get him out early, and into just playing out Kanan, clearing the enemy trooper with saber that was causing me so much trouble. And sort of going to a different game plan, and ultimately it was a successful one. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. I just thought that was it's a bit of a shorter video. I know only one game instead of two or three, but I thought it was an especially interesting game to highlight that aspect of adaptability. And sometimes you have to change what it is you're focusing on in the game in order to get results. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited video content. Catch you guys later.